Well, let's look at Psalm 91. What we have is Psalm 90, just, you know, one psalm back, is attributed to Moses. Now, in Psalm 91, there's no attribution. I have read that some people think Moses also wrote Psalm 91. I don't think there's any way of knowing, and so whoever it was a very wise person, and it's a song of encouragement and instruction. So let's start at the beginning. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. That's wonderfully poetic. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. It kind of just rolls off the tongue. The idea of living in the shelter of the Most High, you can go a couple of directions with, so what would that be? Well, in the days in which this was written, probably within 100 years of David's death or less, a shelter was a temporary structure, and you would use it for a short period of time. I mean, it was not permanent. It was just a shelter, right? A lean-to, a tent. Well, okay. And yet, there is this aspect of the idea of the shelter of the Most High being not a temporary lean-to. It's not a tent. It means to live in the shelter of the Most High, in my opinion, means to live under the covering of the Most High. And you know the Most High is our God. To us, the Most High, that's just another name for God, which it is. And in the day in which this was written, a day where the world around Israel was populated by people who believed in many different gods. They were very superstitious, and yet they were serious about this. I mean, there are scholars who have researched through ancient documents and literature the various pagan religions, and they basically, my sense is, all of those ancient pagan religions come back to a couple of things. One is sex and fertility. And the primary reason for this is because the world was agricultural, not technological. And the fertility of the soil and the richness of your crop, that had everything to do with how you would prosper. And so, if you didn't have the belief in God Almighty, you would need to. I know this is it is an accusation against pagans that they had to invent some outside force who they could appeal to, which would account for the fertility or not of their crops. It just seems like silliness to us. It should seem like silliness to us, but they believed that by making certain appropriate sacrifices, which, by the way, included human sacrifice, they could appease these gods, and most cultures had more than one god, so that this god would respond to them by providing them with crops and fertility of their soil. Oh, by the way, we don't think of this very much at all in our culture, but there was this aspect of fertility. It was desirable to have a very large family, to have dozens of offspring. And in these pagan cultures, monogamy was not the common order of their society. You wanted to have, often, even in the Israelite culture, many wives and produce many, many offspring. Well, there's two reasons at least for that, and forgive me for chasing this thing down the bunny trail, but the first reason was when you had produced many offspring, this was evidence of favor from God, or whichever God, because only those favored by him would have this level of fertility. And so you were constantly seeking favor with this God. And one of the reasons you wanted that favor was because then when the people around you saw your huge family, the evidence of your fertility and the prosperity that it brings, well, that's where the power and influence was. It was totally disconnected from our culture, but it was very real in that day. And a second reason was that this was true for the common people. Probably, well, not just probably, certainly less important for the aristocracy. But for the common person, when you had 7, 8, 9, 12 children, you had workers for your fields, for your farm, for your livestock, and you didn't have to pay them. Well, boy, how did I get there from the idea of living in the shelter of the Most High? Well, it's this, that Israel knew their God was the Most High. There was no one, certainly no one above him, and no one equal. Why is that important? Well, if that's not true, then the first 3 commands are useless. You know, you'll have no other gods before me. You'll make no graven images. You'll not use the name of the Lord flippantly or in vain. If God's not the Most High, those 3 commands are kind of moot. Well, in fact, it's my opinion that if those 3 commands are moot, then the rest of them they have nothing to stand on. Okay. To find shelter, to live in the shelter of the Most High means to be covered by his protection. When you lived in the shelter of someone's home, you were protected by them. You're part of their family. Well, it makes sense then that those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Until we find the shelter of the Most High and and live there within it, pardon me, our life is just a constant, minute by minute effort toward safety and security. But when there's no rest in that, but when we do live in the shelter of the Most High, we will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. There's a lot that, in terms of the symbolism of this and the poetic nature of it, that I'm not going to go into all of it, certainly, because I don't know all of it. But what I do foresee is to live in the shadow of the Almighty. Depending on what time of day, here in the desert, and what time of year, you want to find shade. And sometimes, in order to find the shade, you're going to have to get pretty close to the thing that provides shade. The point is, the shade gives you protection from this blazing sun and heat. The shadow, to live in the shadow of the Almighty, to find rest in the shadow of the Almighty, that's not going to happen a long ways from. It won't. The most protective shadow will be found closest to the one providing the shade, the thing, the one. So to find rest in the shadow of the Almighty, get close. Okay. Again, the Almighty, that's a direct connect with the Most High. My question is, when I read verse 1, is how do you live in the shelter of the Most High? And when you do that, how do you find rest in the shadow of the Almighty? Well, I don't think this happens accidentally. Well, at least not very often. In order for me to live in the shelter of the Most High, I have to, so a couple of things here. First of all, I have to submit to the Most High, because I can't live in the shelter of the Most High without submitting to Him. What keeps many people out of the shelter of the Most High is their pride. I don't want to need anybody. I don't want to need anything. And I can tell you from my own life, this includes people who love God, but still want to be the owner. I want to call the shots. Surrender and submission are not easy, but we'll never be able to live in the shelter of the Most High until we surrender. Now, this surrender is not a one and done thing. It's not like, well, when you prayed that prayer, you surrendered to Jesus and that was a done deal. I wish it were. But for me, I discovered that I got to surrender many times through the day, or else I won't be surrendered. So the challenge today is to look into your own life and just make a judgment call. Observe. Are you surrendering? Because without surrender, none of us can live in the shelter of the Most High, and we will not find rest in the shadow of the Almighty until we do. Well, see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.